Welcome. I'm Jan Risher, editor of Louisiana Inspired, and I'm so glad that you've joined us today for our third Louisiana Inspired Book Club. Today we are discussing I Never Thought of It That Way by Mónica Guzmán, and guess who's with us? Mónica, welcome.
Hi, Jan. Good to see you again. Hello.
Good to see you as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And I saw that you had very exciting news yesterday.
Yes, my paperback came out. I almost there's been so much activity that it was one of those like, oh, don't forget your paperback comes out on Tuesday, but it did. So that was fun.
When I saw that last night, I was like, my goodness, she's got a lot going on.
I do.
Thank you for taking the time to join us. Really appreciate that. And we'll just jump right in if you don't mind, because some readers have sent in questions and I want to get those questions answered.
Okay.
So this is from Liz Krieger, who's in Covington, Louisiana. And she says, Ms. Guzmán, I found your book to be very helpful. However, I have not been able to muster the courage to initiate an honest discussion with people who are so politically different from me. Can you share some suggestions about how to begin a first discussion with those of us who are stuck in the mud, but truly want to have a dialogue that is beneficial to us and to the people who feel so differently?
What a beautiful question. Thank you for that question. I'm noticing you use the word courage, that you feel that you haven't mustered the courage to have this discussion. I think that's an interesting choice of word, because it speaks to the agency that we do all have, but it is so understandable. And I talk about it in the book that not every moment, not every issue, not every person, is the right moment, the right issue, the right person to begin these kinds of conversations. And it's a different journey for everyone. The best thing that I have found for warming up to when you might have the courage or the will or whatever it is to overcome the barrier that's there now is to begin practicing curious conversations across the divide with yourself. No other human being involved. First, you practice with yourself. And you might be thinking, but I'm just me. Like, I'm just one person. Well, we have conversations with ourselves all the time. And it's within that conversation with ourselves that a lot of our fears and barriers are entrenched. So here's a tip. Let's say that it's an issue that you're really politically divided about. You'll be really nervous to talk to somebody who believes differently. Find an article that speaks to that other point of view. Next time you see an article that's about that other point of view, maybe you see the headline and you're like, oh, and you just want to move on, right? Instead of moving on, click on the headline. Take a deep breath and read the article without doing what you might normally do, which is looking for ammo and for affirmation that these people are out of their minds, right? And instead, because I've done it too, I still do it. I catch myself doing it. And instead, change the habit. And as you read the article to yourself, ask yourself two questions. One, what are the deep down honest concerns that inform this perspective for this author? And the crazy thing is, even if they're angry and they're raging, there's a way to look under the anger for those concerns. They're there. What are they? Just have that conversation with yourself. Second question you can ask yourself is, what is the strongest argument for this other side? How could I articulate it so generously that this author would go, yes, exactly. Now, that's a really hard thing to do, but you can practice it with yourself without putting your skin in the game in a conversation with anyone else. Do that a few times and it'll get easier and easier. And maybe you can step toward that first conversation with someone on the other side.
Wow. It's powerful and difficult advice, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So this is a lighter question that a reader sent in, and it's about a recent news event. Did you see the interaction between President Biden and the Trump supporter with the hat?
No, darn.
You didn't. It was last week, and there was an element of fun to it, and there was some lightheartedness to it, where President Biden went into a diner, I believe, and he saw a Trump supporter and they were kind of jawing with each other,
Wow.
And the Trump supporter said, well, would you wear this hat? And he was wearing a Trump hat.
A MAGA hat, yeah.
Well, it wasn't a MAGA hat. It was a
Oh,
different kind of Trump hat.
Trump hat. Got it.
And President Biden said, no, I don't think I'd go that far. And they both laughed. And then he did. President Biden put on the hat. And it was just, I mean, there were two old men. Both of them were old men. The reader, says, struck me that the sort of playfulness that doesn't happen, it was the sort of playfulness that doesn't happen often these days. You haven't seen it, but do you think that that type of interaction is a step in the right direction?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That I didn't see it, but from what I'm hearing, it was in good spirits. It was in a context of dignity and just seeing people's humanity and complete respect. It sounds like this person respected that President Biden would not be voting for Trump at all. Right. And that President Biden respected that this person would not be voting for Harris. And they were able to laugh together. That in and of itself is a model of something really good. Just the physical co-presence. And then on top of that, the ability to be amusing with each other is something we need to see more of. Absolutely.
That whole ability to not take ourselves as seriously, in my experience, goes a long way.
Yes, it does. You were saying in a prior discussion, there's not enough joy.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Let's say a reader named Lisa Fennell I believe she's from New Orleans, said, this is not a question for you as so much as it is a comment. I was skeptical about reading this book at first, but I see that you are not advocating for being persuaded to the other side. You are advocating for listening and seeking knowledge from the person who has an opposing stance. I was relieved.
Yeah, can I comment on the comment? Thank you. Thank you for, I guess, noticing that. I do believe that a piece of respect that is very difficult to reach for in the context of political conflict and disagreement is the part where I'm talking with you, we disagree on something. I accept that you believe what you believe. And you accept that I believe what I believe. I don't need to change you, and you don't need to change me. And even if you want to change me, I know that that's not what I'm here for. There's a piece about like a very basic definition of respect that is just, I accept you as you are, and that includes your mind. And what your mind has concluded in this moment right now. And again, that's really, really tough. That's really, really tough for some beliefs, for some people, because sometimes we come with that sense of, I'm not okay until you change. Because something about your belief, we believe that, and then we give the other person so much power. But it's a beautiful, beautiful sign of respect. So I think we just we learn from each other, and whether people change their minds is up to them.
Do you think, Monica, that part of your ability to get to where you have gotten in terms of your approach to this has something to, clearly it has something to do with your experience as a journalist, but as a journalist, our jobs are to listen to the other person and to tell their story.
Yeah. You don't argue. Right. If you're arguing with someone, how are you going to understand them? Now, arguing as a form of understanding can be really cool if there's a lot of trust and a strong relationship, because then in the argument, there's friction and, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of that, friend. Now you're making me think about things differently. Let me see, but I trust you and I'm good. Let's do this together. But yeah, most of the time, especially if there's suspicion or across a divide, no, if you're arguing with me and I don't feel understood by you, then what are we doing?
And that brings us to a question that we got from several readers. And it basically is, how are you and your parents doing these days regarding the political environment?
Yeah, I saw them last week. We were at Nashville together. I was speaking at Vanderbilt University and they came and it was amazing. How are we doing? We're doing great. We saw the presidential debate together. So that tells you something. On a campus debate watch party, I turned to my mother, every time that I thought Trump said something outrageous and she would be like, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, oh man, okay, I gotta ask her about that. And they would look at me whenever they thought like Kamala Harris was like squirming her way out of a really valid critique. They would look at me and I'd be like, yeah, way to go, you know? And so we ended up talking about all of that afterward, and it was an incredible conversation. And I was late to something at Vanderbilt. Like, so yeah, they're voting Trump, I'm voting Harris. We know, and it's endlessly interesting and sometimes frustrating.
Yes. All right. Another reader asked, what advice do you have regarding what we as individuals can do not to reinforce biases in day-to-day life, media consumption, and on social media?
Not to reinforce biases. Boy, on social media and on media, pay extra close attention to language. Once you start doing that, you see so much that seems quite unnecessary. I've been paying attention recently to the use of the word slam in the media, whether it's Fox News or the New York Times. Harris slams, Trump for blah, blah, blah. Like JD Vance slams. This is it. I'm like, nobody's slamming anybody. What? And the language of violence in our media and in our social media, crushed, creamed, scored, fought. What is this? No wonder we're seeing the levels of rancor. That's not even what's happening, but we put it in those terms because it's entertaining and because it brings out the red meat part of us that wants them to be slammed.
Another thing it does is they're short words. And, as journalists, you're looking for a certain number of characters.
That's right. And most people don't understand that it probably started just because slam happens to be a
four-letter word.
Yeah. It's like, man, it's just the headline becomes too long and then SEO and Google search results. It's like, well, figure it out because this is not. But it's very hard to figure out. As long as somebody's using that language and benefiting from it, then everyone else has to too.
And it's hard to put nuance in 90 characters or less.
Exactly. So that's the other big thing. Change the ratio. If you're thinking about this race and the election a lot, and you're finding yourself, as I have in the past, sucked into a news article at the expense of my children or the friends who are here with me, the conversations I could be having that make me feel grounded, might be a good idea to kind of like look at how much you're on social media and say, maybe I can change the ratio so that more of my conversations are in-person conversations that can be so much more productive and rich and illuminating, and a little bit less on social media. And then again, you'll start to see that divide, that difference, because on social media, we get away with language. We seem to accept language that isn't even never what we would say out loud. And it starts to look a little absurd, which gives you a little resilience from the toxic effects of it.
Right. I want to tell readers who are watching, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and we will ask Monica very quickly. Mm-hmm. One more question that was submitted ahead of time, and it's regarding something later in the book, I believe, regarding stay shaky. When you were talking about your phone and the apps that would shake. How much of a role do you believe that your experience as a journalist in having a conversation in which you work to learn as much as possible to tell someone else's story and remain neutral played in developing your theories? And then the second question on that is, how do you balance all of that with staying true to your own beliefs, or is it values?
That's really good. The journalism piece, there were so many times when during the course of an interview, I would be listening to somebody and they would answer a question and I would answer the next question in my head, like they would say something and I go, oh yeah, so clearly they're also this. And then I'd catch myself doing that. I'm like, no, better ask that question. Because if I didn't ask that question that I had just made an assumption in my head, then I would get them wrong. And I got to tell you, Jan, early in my career, I said the editor of the Midland Daily News in Midland, Michigan, sat down for like a review with me and said, Monica, you have problems with accuracy. Let's name this. And the reason I had problems with accuracy was because I was making too many assumptions. I wasn't checking enough. And there were times when I remember a business owner called me crying because I had written the story about her new business and I got so many things wrong. What a horrible form of disrespect. What a power and responsibility I have to get someone right. And I couldn't do it. So I learned the hard way through like the heartbreak that I was causing other people. And it's gotten me to this point, like, I don't want to get anyone wrong anywhere in my life, you know? And as for how I hold strong to my own convictions, that's interesting. As a journalist, I do think that I spent a good amount of time training myself to not be so loud in my own convictions that I couldn't hear someone else's. So as a result of that, and what I felt took very seriously as a professional obligation, not to be a political actor when I'm trying to cover a community so that others can be political actors, I didn't spend a lot of time really thinking about my politics. So now, however, I'm spending so much more time thinking about it, and I feel this sort of freedom to do it. But I always want to do it in a way that my doors are never closed, because I really don't know where I'm wrong. You know, I would get people wrong all the time when I thought I was getting them right. I don't know when I'm getting myself wrong, when I'm missing a better story I could tell myself that leads me to a different conclusion, a better story that fits me better. I get to decide how to change my mind. Right. But if I close the door to new information, that's on me.
A reader just put this question in the chat. How do you recommend redirecting a conversation when the person you're having the conversation with says inflammatory or trolling remarks?
Do not take the bait. Number one, don't take the bait. Trolling remarks, that's what I think of. You know, trolls are mostly there to like play with you, you know? And sometimes people do give into that instinct. And I don't like using the noun trolls, because we all troll. We all do it to somebody. We all do it. My dad sometimes does it to me. He likes to push my buttons. He enjoys it. So number one, do not take the bait. You know, oftentimes it's the people who know you best, who know your buttons.
I'd like to just, John, if you don't mind, bring up the panel at this point, because I'm not sure how much more time Monica has with us.
Yeah, just a little bit more.
Right.
I'll give just a little bit.
So we've got Deacon Martin Gutierrez, and he's the Vice President of Mission and Community Engagement at the Catholic Charities, Archdiocese of New Orleans. We've got Maxine Crump, and she is the President and CEO of Dialogue on Race in Louisiana. We've got Adrienne Owens, and she is a partner at Success Labs here in Baton Rouge. And we've got the Reverend Michael Bordelon, who is the rector of St. Barnabas Episcopal Church in Lafayette. And I wanted to start with Deacon Gutierrez, because I know that the part that Monica was just talking about if I'm wrong about something, that struck me so hard in the book, Monica. And, you know, do I believe I'm right about everything in the world? Well, no, I'm not. So then I don't know what I'm wrong about. You know? Deacon, did you want to say something about that?
Yeah, that actually did strike me in the book. Just looking back at my own life story, where I've been and where I am now. I look back at beliefs, positions that I had, whether they were regarding politics, whatever. You know, I've been wrong so many times, and I have learned that probably some of the positions that I have or beliefs that I have, except for my faith, could be wrong. You know, so I think that's really important to understand, to accept that I could be wrong.
And Maxine, I know that the part of the book, one of the parts that really struck you was regarding the sorting and othering and silos. And how do you think the book has changed your perspective on political and social divisions regarding sorting, othering, and silos? You're muted, Maxine. You're muted.
And by the way, Jan, I'm so sorry. I actually have to go. My next meeting is here. So I've got to
All
I've got
right.
to jump off.
Thank you
you all so much.
All right.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of the discussion. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye. I knew that she was going to have to leave any moment. I just wanted to get every second that we could. Maxine, were you able to unmute?
Yes, I needed to get my cursor in place.
There we go. So do you want to go ahead and talk about that, Maxine, about the concept of SOS, sorting, othering, and siloing, and how has it changed your perspective on political and social divisions?
It actually has confirmed my position in the way that I operate around that. Anyway, for example, I was invited to an election watch party at the end of the last election, and the group that I was with was 5 other women, and they were all just raging in their conversation about the Trump candidate. This was in the last election. And I didn't say anything the whole time. It was because I didn't want to get into the sorting going too far and the othering going too far, and the siloing. And I thought, I don't belong here, except for the fact that if this could become a conversation where we're all engaged and involved and thinking through these things rather than just hurling these things because we're in the silo and of course we all think alike. And I said, there has to be assumptions that's being made that assumes that I wanted to be a part of this and do the same thing. So it confirmed and really validated what I was able to do in that conversation. Now, granted, I didn't choose to raise questions and go forward. I tried once and it just escalated in the other direction. I just left early because we were in the happy hour part of before we were actually watching the election. And I thought, I think I'll leave now.
Father Michael, one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, what is a recent, I never thought of it that way moment for you? And did you have one in the book?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I definitely had one in the book, and it was when she's telling the story of she brings her group from Seattle and they go in and they meet with the more conservative group, and everyone pairs off. And as they're having their conversations, right, there's this particular farmer who says why he's going to be voting Trump this go round, and it has to do with his farm and his access to water and wanting to keep that. And I remember at first I thought, oh my goodness, like that's it, like that's the only reason. I'm when I'm looking at what I think and what I believe politically, and this interconnection of all these different issues and concerns, immigration and reproductive rights and the economy and foreign, right? You start adding it all together, and it's kind of this collective of where I stand. I'm thinking, and this guy's only deciding this on water. But then I realized that no, it's actually more than water, right? It's his livelihood, it's his family, it's all the other farmers that he's working with. And so for that, in the book, there's so much conversation about where are your values. And for him, that was his values. And I thought okay, well, maybe other people, that's enough for them. And that's all that they need to know. And it's not that he doesn't care about that other stuff. It's just that this is more important. And it was okay, even I need to check myself, right? Of how do I think about others or perceive others, or, if I'm thinking, or if I'm making a value judgment on what they believe in, that's just not the case. And so it was a really great moment for me of like, okay, I need to take a moment too. So that was my, never thought of it that way.
I loved the way the book just reinforced that for me, where I try so hard to think broadly, but then, we all have these moments where we're not giving folks as much credit as they deserve for their perspectives. So, Adrian, the book emphasizes the importance of in-person conversations. Can you share a personal experience when a face-to-face interaction helped you understand a different viewpoint? Kind of like what Michael was talking about in the book.
Yeah. I want to, before completely responding to that, articulate in the book, if you didn't have time to read all of it, she talks about kind of a checklist that you should go through to determine if a conversation is going to be productive. And let me say, I'm already rattling off in my mind kind of these sliders, can you be physically present? Because I think that matters. I often say just pick up the phone. Is there parity? Can one person just hang up, or can you, do you both have equal say or equal footing? There was a slew of them. Are you mentally there? Is there enough time for the conversation? I think there were about 5 things. And so that's kind of reshaped the way that I'm thinking about the conversations I go into now. And I'll share an example of one I entered into just this past weekend with my little sister. And she had been sharing some information that kind of distressed me around vaccines. And I, was really curious where this was coming from, but also distressed by some of the things that she was sharing. And I was able, after so many times I'd wanted to just comment on one of her Instagram stories, or so many times I'd found myself wanting to fire off a text to her. And after reading this book, it really helped me sit and say, find time when you can be physically present, start from a place of curiosity and the understanding the underlying why. And I came in and just kind of said, can I understand where this is coming from? Can you help me understand? Like, I've noticed you've picked up this new thread. I'm curious what it's about. And at the end of the day, it's really about, she's, got a risk for blood clots and is concerned about her own physical health. And that was leading to a lot of other information being tied in with that. And so it was really helpful for me to just find the right time and place for the conversation, to be able to come at that place of like, why, where's this coming from? And we were able to have a really constructive conversation as a result of it.
I know that you're a big fan of personality quizzes. I don't
assessments. Yeah.
Assessments thing. I knew that there was a better word there. So had you taken the Schwartz values assessment that she talks about in the book?
I had never taken it before. No.
I hadn't either. I've done the Gallup, which is about Strength Finder, but I did the Schwartz one. Did you do it?
I did. And what I thought was so interesting about that is I think that's the tie that binds us, right? Especially here in the South. I think that in the South, you end up with close relationships on both sides of polarized aisles. And I think that the thing that allows you to keep eating across the table from one another and having constructive conversations is it's aligned, we're values aligned, I really believe that.
Deacon Gutierrez, in the book, she talks a lot about intellectual humility, acknowledging what we don't know. We've already touched on this, but why do you think that this is so challenging? And have you tried it since reading the book? Or, you were probably doing it before, but could you just talk a little bit more about that and how it has the potential to transform conversations?
Yeah, no, I found the book to be very affirming, validating. I think Maxine mentioned the book being validating for her as well. Monica mentioned during her talk a few minutes ago about starting with yourself. And yes, we got to have curious conversations, but I do believe that it starts with having a curious attitude. And that comes from within me, myself. My wife makes fun of me all the time because whenever we are at an airport waiting or any waiting area and we're just sitting there looking at people passing by, I often find myself wondering, what's their life story? Where are they going and why are they going there? And I wonder, by the way they dress, by the way they look, by their demeanor, what's going on? What's the reason for their travel? So I think, I actually went on YouTube and I heard her say something about certainty being the arch enemy of curiosity. Mm. And when we think that we are 100% correct, it kills curiosity. You're not going to give a chance to the other person. And let me say this, I go around the archdiocese here in New Orleans quite a bit, giving talks about immigration. And there's a huge deficit of common sense out there regarding this topic. There's a lot of misinformation. And I start my conversations with the groups normally by saying that I'm not there to change their minds, that my goal is to leave them with more questions. And if I have done that, I have been successful in my attempt. So, and I see even their body language changing as I'm speaking to them, how before the conversations really got started, how tense they were. And oftentimes I go to groups who are not on the same side that I'm in on this issue. And just by opening their minds and encouraging them, motivating them somehow to open their minds, I hope and pray that hearts will be changed as well.
Yeah, I think that that's such a great point, because in essence, certainty shuts down a conversation, And I'm curious from y'all's perspective, what do you do in those instances when the person who you really want to maintain a relationship with is so completely certain about something that you're not? Does anybody have any advice on that? It's a tough one.
I think she talks about using how instead of why.
Mm-hmm.
Asking how did she or he get to this point,
Right,
that will make it so difficult for that person to see it in another way.
Maxine, did you want to add to that?
Yes. One of the things with certainty usually has a strained emotion with it. And so I find something in what they said that is something I can share and agree with. And it could be something like, yeah, Tuesday is a good day of the week for whatever that they said. I find some point of agreement, or I will say, I think I see your point and I have a question about. So I bring in the curiosity there.
And Father Michael, was there, or for any of you really, there, for me personally, whenever early in the book, when I read the part about the difference that she relates to Newt Gingrich's decision to make the workday week in Washington, D.C., 3 days a week, the connection between that and the political polarization that we have now, because the families stopped being in Washington, D.C., the community dissipated among Congress, whereas previously they would have carpooled together with their kids, regardless of what side they had. Their wives would be friends, regardless of political party. And whenever the whole, slimy politics of Washington, to make that go away, they started having Congress meet only 3 days a week so that the families stayed home, and that community was gone. That just made me go, wow. Were there any other things about the book that struck you guys that way? Or Adrienne, do you want to add something to that?
I mean, that one really stuck out to me. I love to think about systems and how we often underestimate how one small change can have ripple effects, right? And I think several of the things she talked about in the book reflect that. In terms of something that maybe made me see something a different way, one of the things that is the bane of my existence is small talk. I'm just squeamish about it. Like it makes my shoulders crunch. And she talked about, it really reshaped the way I think about small talk. She said that talking about the weather and talking about, mundane things creates ties that bind us. And that opens the door that, just a 5-minute even surface conversation softens the soil for, those seeds of curiosity to be planted. And so that was, I think, something that's, I'm rethinking the way that I approach small talk as a result of that piece of the conversation.
Father Michael, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, I was going to say more of, this idea of how we love to the silo of the othering, and how do you relate to someone that you don't necessarily agree with. And I just recently finished a book, Jesus and the Powers. And honestly, I finished that book and I was really looking for a new book to read. And that's when you asked me, like, hey, would you want to be a part of this? And I thought, well, great, I need a new book. And I loved how much they really kind of link together. And so in the book, Jesus and the Powers, what the author is N.T. Wright, what he talks about how is, Jesus' summary of the law is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And the thing with loving your neighbor is you have to realize that your neighbor is someone other than you. And so how usually when we think about our neighbor, we think about someone that we're sorted with. because we love to love the people who are like us. And like, oh yeah, Jesus, I could go over here and love my neighbor because they're just like me and I know what they want. But that's not the point of it, right? So for someone to be your neighbor, number one, they have to be close to you. You have to walk with them. And number two, you have to be able to recognize that they are not you. They're different from you. And in their difference, that's when you're able to start loving them. Or when the spiritual challenge here is you have to start loving them. And what I love about this book is it gives us the kind of mechanism for how do we actually do that? How do we start to have these conversations with someone who is different than us? And that's what I think I'm sure Jesus says, love your neighbor, but this book helps with, and here's how you can do that. And for me, I'm loving it. I'm hoping to do a book study with this in the church soon. It's that level of book.
Yeah, I agree. I just loved all of the tools. I mean, it's not just you need to do this. Here is a checklist. Here are 9 questions to ask. It went on and on. The next, and this will be the last question, I'd love to get your feedback on it. It's, after reading this book, what is one concrete step you plan to take to foster more meaningful conversations across divides in your personal or professional life? And before I get your feedback on it, I will just say this, and I will try not to get emotional here, but my dad died 2 years ago this week, and I wish I would have read this book before my father died. And so I think that thinking about it from that perspective, are these the conversations you want to have with someone who could be gone? And how could you change? This is about me. How could I change those conversations now? And I will admit that I will wipe away a tear right now because I didn't do that right. I was not the person I could have been in that. And I would hope that other people can learn from that. Okay, Maxine, would you like to add to that?
Absolutely. One of the things that Adrian mentioned is thinking of this in a systemic way, because probably whatever shaped the dissonance or the difference between you and your father, some of the things he believed, some of the values he held was shaped by the way the society was set up. For example, I asked someone who was trying to understand people having to sit at lunch counters when they knew they didn't want them there. And I said, but did you know it was a law that made it legal for people to say, you cannot come to this restaurant? And there was enforcement to say, you can be told, you can be enforced by the police to leave because there is a law that says it's legal. And then there was the fight to say this law is unjust. And so I asked someone thinking, I said, do you ever think about when you sit next to a lunch counter of someone of who's Black, that at one time that would have been something you might not have chosen? So some of what the sorting and othering and siloing is about has been shaped by the way society is set up. For example, in the Dialogue on Race series, I said, use an example when they say, well, you never change, you're never going to end racism. I said, we have had institutional changes that people thought wouldn't happen. For example, smoking in public places. And I said at one time there would be a smoking section on the plane. We never thought about how ridiculous this is, that the air is recirculated no matter what section we're living in. And a young woman raised her hand and she says, wait, there used to be smoking on a plane? So things do change, and when systems change, people's attitudes follow. No one, when it comes to just smoking now, even though there's no law that says you can't smoke in someone's car, there's no law that says you can't smoke standing in an open road, people now have followed the attitude of it's not okay to breathe your smoke onto other people. Secondhand smoke is bad for them, and you participate in that. So attitudes change when what a system change can do helps to reshape the SOS incredibly. And I would like to see more systemic understanding for that among those who lead systems, to know the power that they have to help have this kind of healthy experiences in their relationship with other people that this book is recommending that we try to work on ourselves to do. Through the work that I do with Dialogue on Race, bring it to systems so that they can see the power they have in helping support a healthier society.
Very good. Adrian,
Not
you
enough
wanna add
head
something?
nods.
Adrian, you want to add something there?
I don't know how I add on to that. I mean, I just couldn't agree more, right? I think people underestimate the power and agency that they have. I think the question was, what's a concrete step I plan to take? And I think for me, I really want to start asking more people about their values and digging a little deeper, especially people that I find myself struggling to understand, because I think that's going to open the doorway. We talked about personality assessments earlier. To me, that is such a tool for building empathy. That's why I got into it, to understand people who are not like me. And I see this book as an extension of that idea of using values as kind of a lens through which to understand how others see the world. And once you have that compassion, it makes bridging the divide so much easier,
Right. Deacon?
Yeah, I would agree with Adrian. The book mentions seeking a tour and not a trial. So as I have these conversations with individuals who I may not agree at all with, instead of making judgments and putting them on a trial, seek a tour. How did they end up where they are instead of why? That's the big takeaway for me.
Yeah. And before we go to you, Father Michael, I would also say I loved the part where Monica acknowledged her own way with words and how that wasn't sometimes a fair fight.
Yeah.
I thought there's something there that, people whose words come easy to can really learn some humility there. Father Michael, what about you? Is there something that you're planning to do?
Yeah, I think overall it's about living into my own vulnerability, right? One of the things we in our baptismal covenant, I mean, I ask this of everyone before we do baptism is, will you respect the dignity of every human being? And of course, the response is, I will with God's help, right? But then what does that mean and what does that look like? And the way I kind of see it in following Christ, we're choosing to live into generosity, not necessarily choosing to live into conformity, right? And so the way that we do that is by kind of letting go of my own agenda, letting go of my own, I have to do it this way and it has to be that way. And instead seeing the person for the person and trying to understand, like Adrian said, understand their values, understand what's important to them and why do they believe that. I think it's incredible. I like to tell people that you can't change someone's mind. And think of how hard it is to change your own mind. I can't even change mine, right? But if you change someone's heart, then their head will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way that you can change someone's heart is by walking with them in love. And the way you do that is by letting go of your own and seeing them and walking with them. And so it takes deep vulnerability. It takes knowing that, you know what, I'm going to be okay, but I want to be able to walk with them and learn more about them. And it's, again, I'm not saying I do this all the time. That's why I said it's a practice I want to lean into more. It's easier to talk about than to do. Trust me about this, right? But that is something that I do want to do more and try harder. And kind of take the courage to ask people about their values and why they believe that.
Yeah. Maxine, did you want to add something?
Yes, I actually didn't answer the question of what I did, because I actually did something different that I'm very excited to share. One of the things about asking questions and asking them to yourself, in the dialogue, I'm often hoping that, because we use questions throughout the dialogue, and I'm hoping that people model the fact that we ask questions. Well, after reading the book, I decided I'm going to put questions in for them to ask. I'm going to give I give a scenario and I said, what questions do you want to ask about that? So now I've put them in the position of asking questions. And I thought, oh, she's helped me know that I can put them in the experience of asking questions better than they're going to model it from watching us do it. And so I'm so excited to have that new tool.
I'm a fan of questions. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. I don't want to leave with the impression that my dad and I didn't have a loving relationship. We certainly did. But I wish that I could have just been more humble and what does it really matter? Those kind of details whenever it comes to maintaining relationships. So thank you all so much. I'm so glad that each of you read the book. And for those of you who are watching at home, really, really grateful that you joined us as well. And thanks for all the great questions that you submitted. And before we finish, I need to announce the next book for the final book for 2024. It is by Eudora Welty, The Optimist's Daughter. And it is, man, there could not be a better segue into this. I am indeed the Optimist's daughter. And that was my dad. And so Eudora Welty, this is also Louisiana Book Festival's One Book, One Read. So they'll have a lot about it. If you've never read this book, I encourage you to. There's so much beauty there. Eudora Welty grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and it's just a wonderful piece of fiction, and it's very short, so it should be accessible for more. Thank you, John, for putting that up there. But I appreciate each of you and all of the readers, and please join us for our next discussion and our next book read, and hope to hear from you. And if you have other questions for Monica, send them my way, and I'll send them to her. So all the very best to each of you. Thank you today for being here with us. Bye-bye.